So we're going to be talking about modifiers. Modifiers are part of the sentence that add information to a noun. For example, in this sentence, still scared from the haunted house, Jack walked home with his friend, a brave horror movies fan. The first part of the sentence, still scared from the haunted house, is the modifier, and it's describing the noun, which is Jack. And the second part of the sentence, with his friend, a brave horror movies fan. A brave horror movies fan would be the modifier on the friend, because it's described, in this case, the friend is a noun, and that's a brave horror movies fan is describing the friend. Recognize a modifier. So there's a couple different types of modifiers. One is the ing modifier. For example, in the sentence, writing Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling aimed to. In this sentence, writing would be the modifier because it's the ing word and it's also adding additional information to what J.K. Rowling aimed to do when writing Harry Potter. The second is a past participle modifier. Written by J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter is famous for. The modifier in the sentence would be written because, similar to the first, it's describing, it's adding additional information. And the last one is a noun phrase modifier. One of the most famous books by J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, is famous for. So in this sentence, the noun phrase modifier would be one of the most famous books by J.K. Rowling, because it's describing the noun, which is Harry Potter, which is the book. Another way to write a sentence with a modifier and an independent clause is modifier, comma, independent clause. When the modifier is before the independent clause, the action in the modifier dictates the independent clause's subject. For example, recognizing that many people skip breakfast, the chef chose to make a big lunch for the guests instead. The subject in the sentence is the chef. The modifier is the first part of the sentence before the comma. And the action within the modifier is recognizing. And the action recognizing is being done by the chef. And so you can rewrite or restate that part of this part saying the chef recognizes. When an independent clause and modifier are in the same sentence, there are two different ways to write that. Independent clause, comma, modifier, or independent clause modifier with no punctuation, and they both mean two different things. For example, in the first sentence, the brother yelled at his sister, winning the fight. The modifier is winning the fight because it's additional information. And the brother yelled at his sister is the independent clause. And the modifier is describing his sister, which is the noun, because in the sentence, the sister is the one who won the fight. Compared to the second sentence, the brother yelled at his sister, comma, winning the fight. The independent clause is still the brother yelled at his sister, and the modifier is still winning the fight, but the difference is the subject. In this sentence, because of the comma that separates the independent clause and the modifier, the noun that is winning the fight is the brother and not the sister. Having plus past participle modifier. Having slept through the night, Julia woke up feeling refreshed. Having slept is the having plus past participle modifier, and it's the past version of the ing modifiers, because having slept is a completed action, while sleeping is an ongoing action. Noun phrase modifiers, as I mentioned before, are modifiers that add additional information describing the noun. So for example, Timothée Chalamet starred in Dune, a movie based on a book that won many Oscars. Timothée Chalamet starred in Dune is the independent clause, and a movie based on a book is the noun modifier, because it's describing Dune and basically telling us what Dune is. And the last part of the sentence, that won many Oscars, is a noun modifier on the previous modifier, and also Dune, because it's giving us additional information and details about the Oscars that Dune won. Past participle modifiers are not verbs. For example, the history class taught by my advisor is fascinating. You would think that taught is the verb, but it's not, because the subject must do the action for it to be a verb. And the subject in this case is the history class. And it doesn't make sense to say that the history class is not teaching or the history class is teaching. But it would make sense to say history class is fascinating. And so this is would be the verb of the sentence. And the past participle modifier of the sentence would be taught by my advisor, because it's additional information about the history class that can be taken out, because the sentence would still make sense to say the history class is fascinating, but you could also say the history class taught by my advisor is fascinating. Semicolons, colons, and dashes. Semicolons connect two independent clauses that have a relationship. If the two independent clauses are not related, they cannot be connected. In this sentence, it is raining, I need an umbrella. There are two independent clauses that are related to each other, and so they're connected using a semicolon. Two ways to use a colon is either by separating two independent clauses or an independent clause in a noun phrase. James hates long drives. His favorite phrase is how much longer. The two independent clauses in this sentence is James hates long drives, and his favorite phrase is how much longer. And it can be separated by colon because the second part, the second independent clause, is just elaborating on how much he hates long drives. James told the class about his favorite foods, pizza and strawberry shortcake. The colon is separating an independent clause, James told the class about his favorite foods, and the noun phrase, pizza and strawberry shortcake. And it can be separated by a colon because it just elaborates on his favorite foods. So here are a couple different elaborations that you can use. For the sentence, I love sports. When separating, using a colon to separate two independent clauses, you can ask, how do you love sports? Or how do you show you love sports? And the sentence would turn out to be, I love sports, colon, I play every day after school. And so the first sentence, I love sports, is the first independent clause. And the second independent clause is, I play every day after school, which is answering the question, how do you show you love sports? For the independent clause, colon, noun phrase, you can ask, what sports? And that can be separated into, I love sports, which is the independent clause, and especially football, which is the noun phrase, and answering the question, what sports do you like? Single dashes can do everything colons can. In the two previous sentence examples that we looked at, James hates long drives. His favorite phrase is how much longer, in which James hates long drives is the first independent clause, and the second independent clause is his favorite phrase is how much longer. Where here, what was separating the two sentences, the two parts of the sentences, before was a semicolon, it can also be separated by a single dash. And same goes for the second sentence. James told the class about his favorite foods, pizza and strawberry shortcake. Where James told his favorite foods, the class about his favorite foods, is the independent clause, and pizza and strawberry shortcake is the noun phrase. It can be separated with a single dash. Single dashes also continue non-essential information. For example, the reading took me 2 hours is the main information in the main part of the sentence, and I didn't understand it is non-essential information, but it can be added on with a single dash, which is a dramatic emphasis. When should you use a comma? In this sentence, the comma is separating two independent clauses. The reading took me 2 hours, and I didn't understand it. And so you should use a comma if two clauses are equal in importance. When should you use a dash? Dashes work in nearly any existing structure as long as there is an independent clause before it. And so you can use a dash with in between an independent clause and a dependent clause, an independent clause and a modifier, independent clause and a noun phrase, independent clause and prepositional phrase, and etc. When you have two independent clauses, how do you know when to separate it using a colon or a semicolon? In this sentence, it is raining, I need an umbrella. We need to separate the two independent clauses, it is raining, and I need an umbrella. And so, to find out whether we use a colon or semicolon, we need to ask ourselves, is independent clause number 2, I need an umbrella, an elaboration of independent clause number 1? In this case, it is not. And so, we don't use a colon, but a semicolon. And so the sentence would be, it is raining, semicolon, I need an umbrella. What qualifies as an elaboration? How and what versus why? So we have 3 sentences as examples. The first one, the author wrote the book. He typed it on his computer. He typed it on his computer is answering how the author wrote the book. So this is how. The author wrote the book, a story about two star-crossed lovers. The second part of the sentence is answering what. And the third sentence, the author wrote the book, he needed the money from its sales. The second part of the sentence is asking why the author wrote the book. So out of these 3 sentences, what and how counts as elaborations, but why does not.